Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
It's raining out there, Robin. It's raining out there.
This music works with the rain now. Pretty umbrellas. I get to see all the pretty umbrellas.
Mary S. Holland is on the phone. If you're looking at the streaming video right now, we have the cover of her book. It's the HPV Vaccine on Trial. Mary is an attorney. She has appeared in several documentaries on vaccine issues. She has testified before various state legislators and the UN. She's on the faculty of New York University School of Law and directs its graduate lawyering program. Again, her book is called The HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed. Good morning, Mary S. Holland. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Where are you right now? Are you in the city, in New York City?
Yes, I am.
How's the weather today?
It's a beautiful day. Thank you.
See, you got a good one today, and we don't.
Sorry about that.
Usually I like to rub it in, because usually it's the other way around, you know?
True.
Especially in the winter, right?
Absolutely.
So let me see. Human papilloma virus, am I saying it right?
Correct.
What is that?
So the human papilloma virus is a virus that affects people in epithelial cells. So that could be sort of the soft tissue. It's the throat, it's the genitals, it's skin that's sort of on the inside but exposed to the outside. And it was discovered, about 25 years ago that the human papilloma virus was associated with cervical cancer. Now, it turns out that there are over 200 types of these viruses, but a couple of them were isolated as being oncogenic, causing cancer. And with that knowledge, a group of scientists globally decided to make a vaccine against the infections caused by the HPV virus.
Okay, so far I can't see any controversy. I think I know where this goes, but I'm gonna. So can I guess, and then you can correct me? It goes. Sure. It goes to mandatory vaccinations for young girls who are of an age that the parents feel like it's too early for them because they're not going to have sex anyway, right?
Well, that's not the only place it goes by a long shot, but that's one of the places it definitely goes. You're right about that.
But isn't that what the controversy was about?
Well, that was one of the early controversies, but no, the controversy is much broader than that.
Okay.
The real controversy is that this vaccine was not properly tested. It was never tested against a true inert placebo.
Oh, really?
So we really don't even know fully what it does, and it's been reported to cause over 450 deaths and 60,000 severe injuries in the U.S., and it's been rolled out around the world, and it's caused death and severe injuries, and it's being litigated around the world today. It's just not being reported, basically, in the press.
Oh, my gosh, that is more severe. And so with that knowledge, what was... why were the schools or the school boards, whoever said this has to be mandatory, if they didn't have the testing done, why were they insisting on giving the vaccine out? Yeah.
So the FDA approved it, right? The FDA said it's okay that they tested the vaccine that includes aluminum against what we call a placebo, a false placebo that also contained the aluminum. The FDA signed off on it. The CDC signed off on it. And basically doctors and doctors' organizations, sad to say, they just tend to rubber stamp what the FDA and the CDC say around the world.
Right.
So what we did is a deep dive on this vaccine, and we looked at the actual records that the FDA evaluated. And when you look at those, you see that this was, not proper testing. But doctors get the information from, the drug companies directly, and they look at what the CDC says, and typically they say, okay, it's good to go. Let me clarify, though, Larry, it's only mandated right now in the United States in 2 states, in Rhode Island and in Virginia, and in the District of Columbia. But there are bills, the dream for any vaccine manufacturer is not only to get it recommended by the federal government, which this is now, so they get insurance coverage for this. It gets into a program called Vaccines for Children, so about half of kids get this at a reduced or no cost.
Right.
But once it's the dream is the mandate, right? So that then every kid
I
at
can
a
see that.
particular age level. So that's the dream, and there's bills in almost every state in the United States right now to do that. In many countries, it has been mandated, and in those countries, in some of them, the mandates have been reversed, and there's litigation around the world because girls have died. And, in this country and in some other countries, it's recommended not just to girls but also to boys. So because this epithelial cells, exist in boys as well, the vaccine, the first iteration, Gardasil 4, and now Gardasil 9, which is what's on the market in the United States, it protects against genital warts, and it protects a little bit of protection against anal cancer. And so on that basis, it's being recommended in this country for boys as well as girls. And I want to point out, Larry, as of June, we expect that the Centers for Disease Control is going to be recommending this vaccine for adults up to age 45. So there's a big market, right?
Really?
Age 9 to 45, and the clinical trials were really done on cervical cancer, but it's now being recommended to boys and girls, men and women, and its efficacy is very limited in terms of what we know. And I'm happy to talk about that if you want.
Go ahead.
So is it going to be mandatory?
So it sounds like.
Well, it's mandatory now in 2 states, and in every state, almost every state, there's draft legislation to mandate this vaccine.
All right, so I have so many questions. I don't want to go out of order, but I think I probably will. So let me just ask this one. Usually, when the FDA approves something, they are late in getting to that conclusion, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We hear all the time, Europeans have this already, but our Food and Drug Administration, they're still not sure. And then a year or two later, they finally approve it. And the thinking, I think, is that, okay, well, they're taking their time, but then once they approve it, we're confident that this is a good thing, as opposed to being not so sure if we go to another country. Did that happen with this one, or did Europe also not really test
it? No, in this particular case, there are 2 different types of human papilloma virus vaccines. There's GlaxoSmithKline's version, Cervarix, and there's Merck version, Gardasil. Gardasil first was original, and then Gardasil 9. So the FDA approved Gardasil first in 2006, and then other versions, Cervarix and Gardasil 9, were approved later, and other countries followed the U.S. So the U.S. was first on this, but as I mentioned, they didn't use a true placebo. They used super healthy young women predominantly in the clinical trials, and those young women developed a lot of symptoms. So in the product insert, it says that about 2.5% of girls developed permanent autoimmune conditions as a result of being vaccinated.
Gosh.
But if you look, but wait a minute, the worst is yet to come. If you dig deeply in the documents submitted to the FDA, which we did, 50% of the people, both in the vaccine group and in the placebo group, so-called, they both developed what Merck called new medical conditions. 50% of these super healthy young women developed serious medical problems as a result of 7 months out from having been vaccinated.
That's all
these are serious things. These are reproductive problems. These are gastric problems. These are neurological problems. These are heart problems. These are really serious medical conditions.
That is all I would need to hear. As a parent, I wouldn't need to hear anything else. What would be the penalty against me as a parent if I said no way? I mean, what if it's mandated? What happens to me if I say no?
Right. So in the 2 states in which it's mandated today, there are opt-out provisions. You can say on the basis of religion or on the basis of a philosophical objection, you can say no. There's generous opt-outs in the states. But California, for instance, has no non-medical exemptions. There's a bill in New York where I live to get rid of all non-medical exemptions. If they mandate the HPV vaccine, that's it. Everybody has to get it. No refusal. It's not possible. And it's very clear from the time it's been on the market globally since 2006 that some people are going to be severely injured or die as a result of this vaccine.
Right. I wouldn't do it. So what would I go to jail?
So actually, Larry, you're touching on a point that's very important in the general question around vaccines, that it's very important to preserve the right to prior, free, and informed consent. And the laws we have in the United States that permit states to mandate vaccines are not based on informed consent. In other words, you're being coerced to get a vaccination so that your child can attend a school. So that's a broader problem with vaccines in this country.
Yeah, it is.
So where is the argument then when I don't want to get stuck on abortion? Okay, I don't want to do that. But there's always that statement, it's my body and I can do what I want with it.
Right,
and there aren't any consequences. So how come that same statement can't be used here?
I mean,
you could be a
that's
lawyer.
one of the strangest things, Robin, is that, my body, my decision goes out the window, particularly for the Democratic Party when it comes to vaccines. And so there's this idea that because there may be some kind of an infectious disease, which may be as mild as chickenpox or as serious as polio, there's this idea that you don't have any choice anymore about what gets injected into your body. That's a very scary notion, right? Because, for instance, this HPV vaccine, it's already been proven in what's called vaccine court that this vaccine caused the death of a young woman. This is that it's a very problematic court in the United States, but it's been proven to cause these injuries around the world. So, if you have no choice to say no, it's a problem. And this is an increasing problem with this is now front page news in the United States that so-called anti-vaxxers should be subject to criminal penalties.
And this isn't just based on your own research. You've got two other co-authors on this book, and they've done their own research. And I just don't understand why you all are so knowledgeable of this that your voices aren't being heard.
Well, I was very fortunate to have two co-authors, Kim Mack-Rosenberg and Eileen Iorio, and we worked for several years on this book. This is it's 400 pages, 50, something like that, 100 pages of footnotes. Most of our citations are to government sources or to peer-reviewed science. This is not sort of a fly-by-night accusation. This is really well-researched. And I wish that we were getting more traction. I'm very grateful to be on your show. Families need to know this information. People don't know this. They go to the doctor's office and the doctor says, gee, your kid should get this vaccine along with their Tdap booster or along with, some other vaccine or just as a part of the well kid visit. And people really have no idea, that these problems exist. And frankly, most doctors don't know that these problems exist. Doctors don't know that this wasn't tested against a true placebo.
And your research needs to be out there. I'm wondering if the mainstream TV shows like the Today Show, etc., wouldn't have you on because a lot of their revenue comes from the pharmaceuticals.
Right. You're certainly right about that. That, mainstream media, about 70% of their budget comes from the pharmaceutical industry. So they are not interested. And they have, minders. They have minders from their advertisers who say, no, you can't run that story. So we are on social media. I don't know if your listeners know that in the last couple weeks, Congressman Adam Schiff of California asked the heads of Twitter, Amazon, and Facebook to stop allowing so-called vaccine misinformation. Our book would, I think, be characterized as that by somebody like Adam Schiff. There's a lot of almost public hysteria about, vaccination, and you have a social duty to vaccinate, and anybody who's not doing that is really, a reprobate. They're not going along with what's necessary. It's very strange because after World War II, we developed, the U.S. promoted the Nuremberg Code that said the, informed consent of the individual with respect to any kind of scientific experimentation was essential, and that's been broadened to all kinds of treatments. And so in this country, there's this idea that somehow you can make an exception for vaccines. Vaccines are perfect. Vaccines don't cause any problems. They're completely safe. And then we look to the other side, look at what's happening with the opiate crisis. It's the same industry. Many of the exact same players, they knew that their products were going to cause, injury and potentially death, and they still did it because it was profitable. Vaccines are not an exception to that rule, and in fact, vaccines are more problematic because states can mandate them, and they have liability protection. Many people don't recognize that you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer directly if you're injured or you die. You have to go to a vaccine injury compensation program that's run by the federal government, and 2/3 of cases lose. And then the claims at the other side of that compensation program are very minimal that you can actually bring. But one of the claims you can bring is fraud. And I'm very happy to say there is a case right now from a young woman who lost in the compensation program, so-called vaccine court. She brought a lawsuit in California state court, and it's against Merck for fraud. And that case is going forward, and there's some very high-powered plaintiffs' lawyers on that case, and I think that's going to be very important.
There are so many questions I think people have. I think part of what we live with is the belief, the understanding, and maybe the fact that polio is eradicated mostly because of vaccines, and chickenpox are mostly eradicated because of vaccine, etc. We have some really successful vaccine stories, but yet at the same time, we're all panicked anymore when anybody that we know has a baby. Robin just became a new grandma. The little baby's 3 months old today. And she's panicked because we here started doing a talk show. You hear all this stuff.
Yeah.
That some of the vaccines may cause autism, and we've had parents in the studio who swore up and down that that's exactly what happened. Even though we have doctors who say, "Oh, they're not educated enough; they don't know." Mm-hmm. So I don't know who to believe, and I think that's part of where the public at large needs to be told the truth.
I couldn't agree with you more, Larry. There's a huge issue here. People don't know who to believe. The doctors up, down, and sideways are saying vaccines can't cause autism. They don't cause autism. All of these so-called anti-vaxxers are, giving misinformation. And then there are tens of thousands of parents around the world who are saying, I had a perfectly normal, healthy baby, and I vaccinated the child, and the child became autistic and has never been the same. I'm the parent of a vaccine-injured young adult. So I have lived through, a story of vaccine injury, and it is what intrigued me as a professional, as an attorney, to study this issue. I believe there's enormous misinformation about vaccines and autism. It's a slightly separate thing. One of the reasons I was attracted to write this book about the HPV vaccine is so much clearer, right? When you're dealing with infants and injury, neurological injury to an infant, the infant can't say, I felt great today and I feel all horrible after the vaccine. They're nonverbal. And so it's very unclear, well, what caused what? With an older group of individuals, it's much easier, right? So these teenagers who've died or who've been permanently disabled, these kids were superstars. These kids are verbal. These kids are athletes. These kids are scholars. These kids are musicians. These kids are they're in full bloom of life, and they get this vaccine, or they get 2 doses, or they used to get 3 doses, and they're gone. Their lives are gone. They're in wheelchairs. Wow. They have heart palpitations. They're in the emergency room for seizures. They have permanent new conditions that they'll never be rid of, or they died. In our book, we have a photo insert that gives photos of several of the teenagers who've died. It's tragic.
It is crazy.
So, I understand there's a lot of uncertainty for people. What should I do? I think I would tell your listeners something that's really important. Don't assume that if your doctor says, take this vaccine, it's great for you. Do your own research, right? Read this book about the HPV vaccine, but at a minimum, read the product insert. And people will be shocked. If they just read what the manufacturer tells the doctor, they will be shocked.
Yeah.
Every product insert says it's never been tested for whether it causes cancer or whether it causes damage to fertility. The HPV vaccine, which is supposed to prevent cervical cancer, says it's never been tested for whether it causes cancer, gene mutation, or harm to fertility.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, that's enough for me.
Mary,
exactly.
Mary, I have
this is crazy. Why would I do it if it's not been tested? And the other thing that people need to look at, read the product insert. They will see.
That's what I want to ask you about.
Were never properly tested.
I want to ask you about the product insert, because most people get the vaccine at a doctor's office. They never see any insert. They never see anything.
And the doctor is not legally obliged to give them the product insert. But my advice to people would be, you need to read it.
Where is it? Is it online?
Yeah, they're all online.
Okay,
They're all online.
So before somebody gets a vaccine, you should ask the doctor, what exactly will it be? I'm going to go on my phone right now and read it. And if it says anything I don't like those ads that you hear where they have like 10 minutes worth of talking in not even 30 seconds, like 10 seconds. It's all speeded up. It's like fine print. You can't read it in a paper. You can't hear it on the radio. It's so fast. Do you know what I have an issue with, by the way? I want to go back to something you said earlier, and it's only 2 states, but it could be more. The only way out is to say I have a religious objection, or what was the second thing?
So some states permit, there are 4 different bases for exemptions to vaccines. One is a medical exemption, but that is extremely difficult to get, right? The CDC gives certain categories and says these are contraindications to vaccines. They're very, very narrow.
Right.
The second basis is called a serological exemption, meaning you can get a titer test, and if it shows that you're still immune to measles and mumps and rubella, well, you wouldn't need a booster shot. That's the second type of exemption.
Right.
But the types that you don't have to go to a doctor for are a religious exemption, where you say it violates my core religious beliefs. And some states, now it's only 17, have what's called a personal belief exemption or a philosophical exemption, where you can just say, I don't want it, end of story.
That's okay. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Because I might not have a religious objection to it. I mean, we're in the Bible. Am I going to find what's it called again? No HPV. It's not going to be, but I might just not.
I mean, that's what's so crazy. Of course, there were no vaccines at the time of the Bible or at the time of the Torah. And so, so there are certain religions, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists, Christian Scientists, who take a very sort of uniform rejection of Western modern medicine. But that's not the majority of people who are asserting religious exemptions, right?
And for me, I would just say I don't want it. To me, I'd say I'm the father. I don't want it.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, so from my perspective, that is exactly right, Larry. You have a right, as a human right, to informed consent, and you should be able to reject any medicine. Even if there's a measles outbreak and you're unvaccinated, you say, okay, my kid can stay home from school if there's a case in the school, right? That's the trade-off, because as somebody who's unvaccinated, you are more susceptible, right? You're more susceptible to getting the illness because you're not vaccinated against it. You didn't get a small dose in order to mount an antibody response. That's the trade-off that we've been making in the country for over 100 years, of sort of a religious exemption to vaccination in 47 states. Many
people have given you 5 stars for the book. I want to make sure I say that, but I already knew before looking. I already knew that this is the kind of a topic that's going to get some 1-starers too. Just people who just do not agree with what you're saying, and you got them. You got some 1-stars, but most of the people who review the book are making intelligent comments, giving you 5 stars or 4 stars in some cases, which is, might as well be a 5. It depends on what they actually write under their 5-star or 4-star thing. But I think this seems to be a political thing in a way, but I don't even see.
It's the money.
I don't.
It has to be the money to the politicians.
Well, it's a very lucrative product, right? So it's bringing in billions of dollars a year for Merck. I'd say that we worked very closely with many doctors and scientists in writing the book, and I don't know if you noticed that we have a preface by a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Dr. Luc Montagnier, who studied viruses for his whole life. And in his preface to our book, he calls this vaccine a crime, because this is one that they know has serious, serious side effects. And it's never actually been proven to prevent a single case of cancer so far. They didn't have to prove that it prevented cancer to get licensed. They had to prove that it reduced cervical lesions, abnormal growth that may, in rare circumstances, lead to cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. So this one is really, this is kind of the most problematic of all vaccines. It's also the most expensive, and it's the one that's being given to older children and adults, and so the injuries are much clearer than when we give vaccines.
You still there? Mary?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I know you got to run. The book, I found it on Amazon. One line I wanted to read from the Amazon description. Ultimately, this book is not just about the HPV vaccine, but about how industry, government, and medical authorities may be putting the world's children in harm's way. That's. I love that one sentence right there. Mary, the book is on Amazon. It's called The HPV Vaccine on Trial. Do you have a website dedicated to the book?
I'm sorry, say that again, Larry?
Do you have a website dedicated to the book?
Yes. The website is hpvvaccineontrial.com.
Okay, very good. Mary, thank you for being on the air. Thank you for writing the book.
Thank you so much.
All right, we will be right back. Why not serve a delicious, intimate, and very easy dinner from Honey Baked Ham of Ocala? They have about the best ham produced ever.